1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes.
That's the end of the game with the final score, Green Bay 35 and Kansas City 10. And of course, this game meant so much.
Threw a party in the county jail. The prison band was there and they began to wail.
Hi, today on
Daily Dose
of
Decades,
we will be going over the decade of the 1960s. Hi, my name is Noah Glaza, and I am introducing
Braden DeRussell, Grant Milkey,
Braden Beamwinder.
and all together we will be going over the many topics of the 1960s. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, today we're going to be talking about the 1960s. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're going to dive a little bit into the music. So the Bay of Pigs invasion was a U.S.-backed invasion of the island of Cuba. We did this because we wanted to remove the communist government run by Fidel Castro, because the Soviet Union, our rival, would ally with the communist Cubans, and they would put nuclear devices on the island that would be in range of our entire country, and we did not want this to happen. Cuba became communist because of a revolution spearheaded by Fidel Castro. That's how he came to power. And to take back the island, we decided to train up a guerrilla force of Cuban exiles. And the day of the invasion, we wanted to conceal U.S. involvement. So we decided to scale back our Air Force to make it not look like we were involved. And the invasion failed because of this, because the invasion force was outnumbered and they could not take out any of the heavy tanks or vehicles that the Cubans had. This resulted in a heightened tension with the United States and the USSR. Okay, and the Cuban Missile Crisis took place shortly after the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was a conflict that broke out between the USSR and us, and it happened because the Soviet Union put missiles on the island of Cuba, which we thought was going to happen, and we got our missiles ready in Turkey, and it just kept building and building until eventually Nikita Khrushchev and JFK decided to break down and communicate, and it was actually the closest we ever got to nuclear war, and there was a few peace treaties that were signed because of it. Like, we took out our missiles from Turkey, and the Soviets took out their missiles from Cuba, and it was a very scary time for both parties. Okay, the music was unique. I mean, it was a booming industry with hundreds of millions of records being sold. And it also was a way for Americans to express opinions, like at the festival known as Woodstock, where all the hippies went to protest the Vietnam War. That's all I have for you today.
Hello everyone. On today's segment of Daily Dose of Decades, I will be talking about the JFK assassination and Medicare and Medicaid Act. Let's get started. JFK was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. He was in a car with no roof, and he was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. No one was ever 100% sure who killed JFK, but the person who they thought did it was a man by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. Many people did not believe that JFK was killed by conspiracy. They believed he was shot out of spite. There are some rumors that the government was involved. They say that Lyndon B. Johnson set him up to be killed. They say he hired Lee Harvey Oswald to kill him so Lyndon B. Johnson could be president. Lyndon B. Johnson also went to see JFK's wife to console her and make her feel better. On August 28, 1965, they made the law called Public Law 89 through 141. This said that if you tried to assassinate, murder, or attempt to kill or kidnap the president, jurisdiction is now federal. People stated in the Warren Report that Oswald was trained to use the rifle, so he was an expert and knew where to aim and how to use the weapon. Next up, we have Medicare and Medicaid. Lyndon B. Johnson, on July 30th, 1965, signed the Medicare and Medicaid Act. This made it so the elderly could get proper medical care. It provided the insurance they needed to get the treatment they needed. It was funded by the government's tax earnings and helped a lot of people in the 1960s who were 65 or older. In the first 3 years of this act, over 20 million people enrolled in the program. The act technically was made 2 decades sooner by the president named Harry S. Truman. When he was about to leave office, he kind of backed away from the topic and never really made it official. This made a lot of people happy when Johnson signed it in 1965. Before Johnson signed the act, people believed that an illness-prone nation is a bad risk. The government noticed that if the U.S. had a lot of diseases that people don't want to trade with us or come to the U.S., the diseases will spread in the United States if people don't have the proper medical care. People had a lot of debt, so they couldn't afford the health care. That's why Johnson signed the act. And that's JFK assassination and Medicare and Medicaid.
Hi, I'm Braden B, and this is my part on Daily Dose of Decades. First, we're going to be talking about the March on Washington. The March on Washington was a large protest that occurred on August 1963. This protest consisted of many people gathering in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The protest tried to draw attention to the challenges African Americans faced after the Emancipation Proclamation. MLK appeared in this event in his famous speech titled "I Have a Dream." The protest pressured President JFK to pass some civil rights bills. The person to create this march was Philip A. Randolph and Martin Luther King. They planned to capitalize on MLK's popularity and use the NAACP to give more rights to African Americans and get jobs for African Americans. 200,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial to commemorate the 3rd anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. Some of the effects of this protest was that JFK made provisions to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. One of the main things that was influential during this time was MLK's speech. He talked about how African Americans and white people should be the same, and if they were, the U.S. would benefit from it. It would change many people's mind about segregation in the 1960s. Tons of people watched his speech on TV and in person and on films. The March on Washington was one of the most influential protests of the Civil Rights Movement. Next, I'll be talking about the moon landing. On July 20th, 1969, many people watched the first ever moon landing occur. Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin became the first ever humans to walk the moon. This achievement by the U.S. marked the end of the space race, a race between the Soviets and the U.S. trying to get to the moon first. The moon landing caused a large impact on science and technology because it was now possible to get people to explore space by using oxygen tanks and space shuttles. The NASA organization was challenged to getting the moon before the Soviet Union. The challenge was hard because the Soviets had been already working on to get to the moon for a long time. Apollo 11 was the first ever spaceship to settle on the moon. NASA had completed the first challenge given to them by JFK. This challenge shows so many Americans worked to get to their new goals. Apollo 11 aircraft launched from Cape Kennedy in July 16, 1969. 650 million people in person and on TV watched the ship launch into orbit. When they got to the moon, the two astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, were tasked with getting to the moon, getting moon rock for experimenting on. They placed down many other things such as scientific experiments and equipment. They also placed an American flag. Next I'll be talking about fashion in the 1960s. In the 1960s, the fashion started to become some of the most popular fashion periods of all time. Some of the outfit trends of the 1960s are still worn today. Fashion in the 1960s started to become more casual and colorful. One of the fashion trends from the 1960s is ladylike elegance. One big trend in ladylike elegance was popularized by Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. This trend in ladylike elegance had people wearing skirt suits and other accessories such as white gloves, pearls, and matching hats. Another fashion trend from this time was swinging London. London came to be found in London, as the name suggests, but it was brought to the Americas and popularized in the 1960s. The clothes were targeted at the youth, which had made the most disposable income than any other generation. This trend consists of miniskirts and mini dresses that are simple, bright, colorful clothes. Boutiques sold these clothes and were popular at the time because it was a different shopping experience than going to department stores. At the boutique, they played 1960s music and were owned by younger people. The older generation hated this form of clothing because it differed from the style of clothes they wore when they were young. Next, I'll go into some technologies that were made during the 1960s. The first invention was space exploration. In the 1960s, it marked the beginning of space exploration. The U.S. achieved the moon landing in 1969 during the Apollo 11 missions. People are now still exploring space and looking for more life that is not human. People are looking for planets that are fit for human habitats. The birth pill, also known as the pill, was an easy, accessible pill that women could get to stop having a baby. People all around the world use this pill because it's easy to get and take. The ATM was created in the 1960s by Don Wetzel, and it made the process of withdrawing cash easier. A person could go to an ATM and take out money from their bank accounts. This was never seen before because people used to stand in line for hours at popular banks to get money. The last invention that I'll be talking about is Kevlar. Kevlar is a powerful material created in the 1965 by Stephanie Holek, who's a scientist at DuPont. DuPont would take over the idea of Kevlar and make it a commercial resource. Kevlar is now used in canopies, canoes, tennis rackets, tank armor, racing sails, and bulletproof vests. These inventions had a large impact on society and science during the time period. They marked a point in time where some inventions that we still use today are starting to appear. These inventions played a huge role in making the 1960s to the 1960s.
Hi, my name's Noah. You should have known this by now. And today we'll be going over our last bit of the news broadcast. And we'll be talking about values and culture, entertainment, the Martin Luther King assassination, and the 1960s election. Yay. First, we'll start off with culture and values. The 1960s was a decade where many cultures and values changed. For example, one of the values that changed were more families were getting more cars. Instead of usually only having one, most families and households will now have two, with cars like the Chrysler Desauto coming out and the 1960 Corvette. Another thing that came out was a radio, the portable radio. This made it so people could listen to music on the go. People also became hippies for some reason. This meant that they believed in like happy stuff and saving the environment and stuff. Wow, that's one topic down. I can't wait for the others. Next, we'll be going over entertainment. There was lots of entertainment in the 1960s, including movies, sports, and the 1960s Olympics in Mexico City. All these things created lots of entertainment in the 60s. Many famous movies were released in the 60s. Some of these movies are titles like The Grinch, Romeo and Juliet, Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, West Side Story, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and others. Even though many popular movies came out during this time and millions of dollars were made, the movie industry was hurting, and it was hurting bad. Due to the studio systems that Hollywood used to thrive off of before the 60s, it was becoming more of a problem, especially because low admissions were coming in because it was hard to connect with younger audiences during the Vietnam War. Next, sports. Sports were also a huge part, and during this time, we would see football taking the hearts of many Americans and their homes. During this time, we will see football pass baseball in both game attendances and television viewership. The first ever Super Bowl would be played in 1967 with the Green Bay Packers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. The Green Bay Packers would destroy them 35-10. That's sad. Another sport we're going to be touching on is boxing. During this time, there was one heavyweight boxer that would become very popular, and his name was Muhammad Ali, winning the heavyweight crown in 1964. Lastly, for this decades of entertainment, there was the 1960s Mexico City Olympics. The Olympic Games mattered a lot for a couple of reasons, but the summary of it that I'm going to make is that it was the 14th occurrence of the more modern Olympics. At this time, there was over 5,000 athletes representing over 83 countries this year, and it was also the very first Olympics to be shown on television. Wow, that's pretty cool. What they would do for that is they would record it, and then they would send it back overseas at the end of the day and fly it to New York and America and stream it on CBS television network. Not what you're watching right now. The USR would end up taking home the most medals, with 103 medals being taken. Right behind them is the United States with 71 and Germany with 42. Also, the first Black African would win a gold medal at the Olympics. Next, we'll be going over the Martin Luther King assassination. In this decade, we also had a famous assassination of Martin Luther King. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was shot dead while he was standing on a balcony outside of his second-floor hotel room. The hotel was Lauren Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. News of this assassination prompted lots of people to commit racial violence. Many areas were affected of this. Most of them ended up being cities. Shortly after his assassination, police found the murder weapon being a Remington rifle next door to the hotel. After it was found, the FBI did a search and traced it back to an apartment in Atlanta, and it matched the prints of a man named James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray, 40 years old, was a fugitive who escaped a Missouri prison a year earlier. His identification of him led him for an international manhunt for Ray. On July 19th, 1968, he was found and handed over to the United States to stand for trial. He confessed the assassination and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. King was originally in Memphis, Tennessee, because he was with a protest for striking Memphis sanitation workers. Lastly, in this decade that I'm going to be going over is the 1960s election between John F. Kennedy, who would eventually become the president, versus Richard Nixon. They were both born in the 20th century. During this election, the first ever televised presidential debate happened. Kennedy would end up taking this presidential debate in many ways, but mostly it was because he looked young and healthy and way better than Nixon. This would end up costing Nixon the presidency. During this time, election campaigns were widely based over the current time's Cold War tensions also, with the Soviets having launched Sputnik 3 years beforehand. Nixon ended up losing to Kennedy by only 120,000 votes in the end. Looking at Illinois and Texas, which should have gone to Nixon according to many, Kennedy still took those states, and many people questioned whether he scammed the elections or not. Many Republicans wanted Nixon to contest the results, but he didn't do so. He ended up being praised for not doing this by his own supporters. I hope you enjoyed.